I want to begin this review by paying my respects, as it were, to Human Head Studios, the creators of the original Prey. And I do that because this must be a fairly shitty week for the men and women of that studio who helped make the original Prey happen all those years ago, and who never got the chance to release the sequel that they were clearly so passionate about. In 2006, Human Head Studios, in association with 3D Realms and 2K Games, released Prey. Prey is that sort of game where you probably remember what the box art looked like, but didn't play it because it was a single-player focused sci-fi shooter that got some good reviews but nothing to set the world on fire. Truth is, Prey was actually a really good game, with some interesting themes and some strong gameplay mechanics that you don't see in a lot of other games. I won't go as far as to say that it was underrated, but I do think that if you go back and watch some gameplay, and I've left some links in the description below, you'll probably be really impressed by what you see. So Prey releases and it sells 1 million units between the PC and the Xbox 360, and of course work begins on a sequel. Only at this time 3D Realms was in all sorts of financial trouble and had to start selling off its IP. Bethesda then went on to buy the Prey IP, and they announced that the work on the sequel would continue under Human Head Studios. At this point, disagreements began to occur between Bethesda and Human Head to the point where Prey 2 was eventually cancelled in 2013, a full 6 years after the sequel was announced, and development was handed over to Arcane Studios, the studio behind the fantastic Dishonored series. I won't go into the details behind the disagreements between Human Head and Bethesda because I'm not a big believer in speaking when I don't know the facts, and frankly speaking, I don't know the facts. Suffice it to say though, the people at Human Head Studios were bitterly disappointed that they didn't get the chance to deliver the next iteration of their franchise, a sequel that looked to break away from the predictable, more of the same style trappings of modern AAA game development, and instead deliver something radically different from the first game, while still remaining true to its thematic underpinnings. If you're interested to see what the original Prey 2 might have been, I'd recommend checking out Hyperbit Heroes' video, which I've left in the description below. It provides a really great breakdown of the sort of gameplay mechanics and ideas that Human Head were trying to bring to the table the second time around. As pleased as I am to see this 2017 Prey being released, I'm also sad that this other sequel, Prey 2, didn't get released because it looked pretty damn rad. To those at Human Head Studios, I would say only this: there's no way that Bethesda would have taken the name of your previous game and slapped it on a totally different, unrelated game if the work you had done on the first Prey was any less than exceptional. I'm sure that serves as little consolation, but I just wanted to pay tribute to your fine work before I review this game released by Arcane Studios. And that's probably a good segue to something very important to understand about this new Prey. It is totally 100% different from the original, in every way. It's a reboot of the franchise that brings across the name only, while changing everything else: the characters, the story, the narrative structure, the gameplay mechanics, all of it. So if you've played the first one and you're expecting more of the same, you're going to be disappointed. But if you're looking for a really well-made, really smart, expertly constructed, psychological first-person experience, then chances are you're not going to be disappointed by Prey in the slightest. Because Prey 2017 is one of the most deeply rewarding and intellectually stimulating experiences I've had in a long time. It continues a rich tradition set down by System Shock, Half-Life, Deus Ex, and Bioshock. Games that give you a gun to fire, but are in fact more about exploring and unlocking a world dripping with atmosphere, and progressing through a story that will constantly engage you with its omnipresent sense of mystery and foreboding. I went into Prey completely blind, as I'd not researched the title at all before playing it, and I came out eyes wide open from the thrill of it. And while Prey doesn't necessarily break any new ground, it takes a whole bunch of pre-existing settings, ideas, themes, and gameplay mechanics and delivers on each one of them brilliantly. So today, I want to share what makes Prey so brilliant. Ladies and gentlemen, I submit to you my review of Prey. I think the best way to enjoy Prey is to understand the rich history it's drawing from, because Prey is a game that owes a lot more to the past than it tries to invent a new future. So appreciating that past, I think, greatly enhances your overall appreciation of the game. So let's take a quick trip down memory lane, and let's begin where most people think it all began. In 1998, Valve released the seminal genre-defining Half-Life. Combining action, platforming, puzzle solving, and a touch of cinematic flair, Half-Life is often credited as being the first thinking man's shooter. The legend goes that before Half-Life, every shooter was essentially a Wolfenstein or Doom ripoff, where killing as many Nazis or demon dogs was the primary objective. And this narrative is sort of true, but for one very important exception. Looking Glass Technologies' System Shock, released in 1994. Directed by Doug Church and produced by Warren Spector, both of whom went on to create Deus Ex some years later. System Shock pitted you, a nameless hacker, against a 2001 Space Odyssey-style AI gone nuts called Shodan. The first-person mechanics were far from groundbreaking, but that's because they weren't the focus of the game. The focus instead was on exploring the maze-like ship you were trapped on, collecting items and solving puzzles to eventually escape. Key to the success of the game was the idea of emergent gameplay. Put simply, emergent gameplay looks to give you, the player, some basic but highly functional tools, and then lets you creatively solve puzzles in ways that perhaps the developers themselves wouldn't have predicted. A very basic example of this is something like exploding barrels, where if you shoot them the moment an enemy is walking past them, they will kill the enemy. System Shock was essentially built around these sorts of possibilities, and all of them were informed by not only the environment, but also by the player's build and inventory and all sorts of stuff, meaning that the different ways you could solve problems made the game immediately replayable for those who like to solve problems in different ways. System Shock was a hugely ambitious game for its time, but much like so many other ambitious enterprises, System Shock arrived a little too early. It didn't perform particularly well from a sales perspective, despite glowing praise from critics. More than that, its ambition outstripped the technology available to it. The game design delivered incredible, groundbreaking exploration, puzzles, and narrative, but the game engine couldn't deliver a compelling combat experience, and you got the sense that System Shock was as much a point-and-click text adventure and menu navigation simulator as it was a first-person shooter. This didn't lessen the impact of the game, but the result is that the game stood more as a blueprint for future efforts, rather than existing as a timeless masterpiece like games that were eventually modeled in its image. System Shock 2 was released 5 years later, and it's one of those games where if you go back and play it now, as I did in preparation for this review, you realized how little that game has aged. It still feels so professional and smart and contemporary, and that can only happen if both the core idea and delivery were good enough, and if nothing has come along since then to meaningfully advance the formula. And both of those things are true in the case of System Shock 2. While Deus Ex, Half-Life 2, Thief 2, and the Bioshock series were all brilliant games, nothing was as ambitiously complex as System Shock was. Its combination of inventory management, item use, hacking, psionic powers, and loads more was just so densely packed in, while also simultaneously delivering a more than competent first-person shooter experience that drew heavily on horror elements. Nothing has nailed the System Shock 2 formula in the last 18 years better than System Shock 2, and it was this bar that Arcane Studios set for themselves when they began the development of Prey. How do we know they set this bar for themselves? Well, the leaked email announcing the green lighting of the project says it right there, calling it a spiritual successor or System Shock 3. It's an extremely ambitious goal for them to set for themselves, but if any studio was going to be able to do it, it was probably going to be Arcane, whose Dishonored series so successfully fused elements of Deus Ex and Thief to deliver a wonderfully crafted stealth action experience. For me, the biggest question I had going into Prey wasn't whether or not it would be a good game, since Arcane know what they're doing, and I had a lot of faith in them to deliver something good. The real test was whether or not they could live up to their bold System Shock 3 ambition in an age where the dumbing down of games, particularly AAA games, is rife. The beauty of System Shock lay in its uncompromising intelligence and complexity, and its emergent gameplay, allowing you to truly play the game your way. This is what I wanted more than anything else, and I'm pleased to tell you that Arcane Studios deliver on this in spades. But before we get into unpacking how Arcane did this, let's take a step back and appreciate what I think Prey's finest achievement is: the best haunted house in space you've ever been trapped inside of. If I was to say to you that you were trapped on a deserted island, your mind is immediately going to start thinking things. You're going to think palm trees, beaches, searching for water, hunting for food. It's all very clear in our minds because we've seen and heard it many times before, from The Lord of the Flies to Tom Hanks. Similarly, if I was to say to you that you were trapped in a haunted house, your mind would probably go somewhere between those predictable but fun carnival rides to memories of any number of classic horror films that you might have seen. Ideas like these make sense to us because they're familiar, and we're happy to return to them again and again because they are inherently good ideas that make for great storytelling and dramatic tension. Evolving from both of those ideas is a more complex idea, and it's also one of my favorites: the haunted house in space. It takes the isolated, helpless, you're-on-your-own reality of the deserted island, and it fuses the tightly packed corridors and aliens breathing down your neck terror of the haunted house nightmare to produce some truly great cinematic and video game experiences. Ridley Scott's Alien is the go-to example for film here, but games have done a superb job in this space as well, like the awesome Dead Space games, or the original Prey, or even the recent Doom if you want to stretch the rules a little bit. And to this list you can now add Arcane's Prey, and I have to say that no other video game has nailed the haunted house in space motif better than Prey has. This is one of the best haunted houses you have ever found yourself stuck in. In Prey, the world you're exploring reveals itself to you slowly. It begins in your apartment. Sleek, chic, glossy, and shining, it feels almost like Mirror's Edge the first time you look out over that world vista. Soon things change and you'll find yourself exploring the polished Art Deco finishings of the Talos I space station. With obvious flavors of Bioshock shining through, it's a familiar interior that orients the player before they begin descending into the technological guts of the ship to solve its problems and survive. It's not until later in the game, when you do your first spacewalk, that you get the chance to sit back and see the Talos in all its magnificence. A towering monolith of technological terror, and every inch of it expertly crafted to test the player both intellectually and psychologically. Prey gets many things right, but the single best thing it does is a level design. No doubt, unquestionably, without qualification, Prey's level design is some of the best you will ever see. It opens up in waves before you, where every new step in the main story opens up a new area that just happens to be connected to two other areas. You start to make sense of the map over time and begin to appreciate how huge and how intelligently strung together it all is, like a giant, perfectly thought out spiderweb. I love it when games can build a place that feels both real and interesting, and Prey does this. While the story was strong enough, it was in fact the sense of exploration that kept pushing me forward during my playthrough. From stylish movie theaters to greeneries to power reactors and all of the infinite space outside the doors that I could freely traverse in at will, Prey's world is absolutely wonderful, and it's more than enough reason alone to give Prey a look. If I could offer one criticism, and it's one that I'll offer in various ways throughout this review, it's that Arcane have chosen to be fairly safe with a number of their choices. And nowhere is this more evident than in the Art Deco stylings of large portions of the game world. The underlying level design, the wireframe of the game, is amazing, but layered on top of that is a setting that we've seen a few times before, most notably in the Bioshock games, which are certainly strong inspirations for Prey in more ways than one. When Bioshock dazzled us with its debut of a stylized Art Deco world, it left an impression that we will never forget, and we will always associate Art Deco in video games with Bioshock. In that context, Arcane's decision to stick to this approach is somewhat disappointing, because you're probably not going to remember Prey's setting for anything really. Where Alien Isolation opted for a heavily lo-fi sci-fi look inspired by the films, and Dead Space goes all in on the high-tech setting, Prey feels like Bioshock in space, and I think it does the game a bit of a disservice. Still, it's a minor complaint in the big scheme of things, and I think the last time I enjoyed one of these very tightly packed, maze-like worlds as much as this one was Batman Arkham Asylum, the classic from Rocksteady many years ago. The setting, fused with the structure, makes it work really well. It's by no means breakthrough, but it's one of the best, most well-executed level design efforts you are going to find anywhere. But what's a haunted house without a few ghosts? Well, Prey's got them too, and while some of them are underwhelming, some of them are the best ever put into any horror game. Grab your wrench and start swinging, because you have no idea what that innocent coffee cup on the table is getting ready to do to you. I know where I'm going. The voice over the communicator, January, has told me that there are things going on that I don't understand, and he can explain them to me, but first I need to get to my office. I head through the large lobby doors of Talos I, which serves as the main hub for the open and interconnected world, and as I head up the stairs, I'm stopped by a trash can, which is slowly rolling down the staircase. That's weird, I think. And then I get to the top of that staircase, and I'm looking at another trash can. Why would there be two trash cans on a stairway landing? That makes no sense at all. And that's when it dawns on me. That's no trash can, that's a mimic. Mimics are the absolute best part of Prey's suite of enemies. A creeping, crawling, spider-like enemy, they can take the form of any inanimate object you see. So that coffee cup sitting on the table might be a coffee cup, or it might be a face-sucking alien ready to pounce. The only way to know for sure is to swing first and ask questions later. Hitting or shooting a mimic while it's shapeshifted will pull it out of its shapeshifted form, and the battle can commence. And if you think that this is going to result in you worrying that every single inanimate object could be a mimic, you'd be right. You literally walk into every room in Prey and do a quick scan to see if anything looks out of place, wondering if any of it is a mimic in disguise. And the brilliance of that is that very often these mimics are imitating other nearby objects, such that you can sort of puzzle solve your way through this a little. Rather than just hitting everything with your wrench, you start to look at places where there are two of something, where there perhaps shouldn't be. It doesn't work every time, but when it does and you correctly walk up to some suspicious looking chair and smack it to find out, bam, yes, you were right, that is a really great feeling. And finding them actually isn't the end of it either. They'll actually scurry away if the tide of battle turns against them, and you'll see them transform back into an inanimate object in an attempt to sort of hide and pounce once again. Only sometimes you can't see them make this transformation, as they'll have run around a corner, and you end up turning that corner, staring into this room full of inanimate objects and asking yourself, which one is it? It's the ultimate evolution of the jump scare, because where most jump scares happen in dark places or scripted corridors, Prey's jump scares can happen at any time, and they can happen again from the same enemy only a few seconds later if you didn't manage to kill it the first time. Mimics are the crown jewel of Prey's enemy design, one of those rare gameplay tricks that works both technically and thematically. Sadly, this is the limits of Prey's ambition with regards to enemy design, because the other enemy types you'll face throughout the adventure are far less interesting, and some of them are just downright annoying. The lupine-like phantoms you'll soon run into will teleport wildly in an attempt to melee you or throw projectiles at you, and over time they gain an electrical charge or a fire aura, making them dangerous to be close to. The floating telepaths can control humans or other technologies while also throwing projectiles at you. And the hulkish nightmare creatures are essentially harmless, as their size allows you to sit in places that the nightmare can't reach unless it's throwing projectiles at you. The worst though are the endlessly spawning operator drones that appear in huge numbers towards the last third of the game. They have more HP than some of the toughest enemy aliens, and a lock-on laser that melts you, and they fly around erratically, making them tough to shoot. Killing them immediately spawns another one unless you find a way to shut down the operator dispenser, which isn't always possible depending on your playthrough style. In my view, Prey commits that cardinal sin where it attempts to increase difficulty in the latter parts of the game by increasing both the number and HP of its enemies, rather than increasing their movesets or intelligence. Much of the carefully constructed tension present in the first 2/3 of the game is lost when Arcane just starts throwing enemies at you en masse, making successful stealth runs extremely frustrating, and the high HP of those enemies making full frontal assaults equally frustrating. I think Prey is at its best in its opening 2 acts, where enemies are scarce and each of them feels like a puzzle to be solved. Later on, enemies start to feel like a roadblock that must be either detoured or crashed through, and the elegance of the Emergent gameplay systems is hurt by this. Still, the strength of those Emergent gameplay systems is one of Prey's biggest triumphs, so they do carry the day in the end. Let's now turn to those systems and explore how Arcane managed to deliver us the System Shock 3 that they were working towards and the one that we'd all been hoping for. I am stuck. Really stuck. I've been here for about an hour, in fact. I need to get to the power plant to meet someone, but the door is locked and I don't have the password for the door. I could have found the password somewhere, but obviously I missed it and I have no idea where it is. I bang helplessly on the screen, but unsurprisingly that doesn't do anything. I have the option to hack the password, but I haven't put enough points into the hacking skill tree, so unfortunately this isn't an option for me. Normally I could actually go back and explore the station, maybe do a few side quests for some quick neuromods, which are the things that give me skill points, but in this particular situation, the whole of the Talos I station is on lockdown, so I can't go anywhere. I'm stuck. After about an hour of running in circles, I eventually look up to see a ventilation shaft open to the right of the door, and beneath it, something tall that I can climb on top of. Success, I think. I finally cracked it. I felt like an idiot at that point, but at least it was done. So I climb up and I start jumping toward it, but I realize that the jump is too high. I could have made the jump had I put points into the agility skill tree, but again, I didn't do that, and now I can't do that. Scratch that, I'm still stuck. But then it occurs to me, what if I could put something on top of that tower and then use whatever I put on top of it to get me a few extra inches to help me make the jump? I try and throw a few objects up there, but that doesn't work. So I realize I need to build a set of steps that will allow me to walk up there and place the item on top of the tower. Now, normally I wouldn't be able to do this, but luckily I spec'd into the leverage skill, which allows me to pick up heavy objects and reposition them. So that's exactly what I do. I lift some heavy boxes that I wouldn't otherwise be able to lift. I stack them nice and high to make a makeshift staircase, and then I place a stool on top of the tower to give me the additional few inches I need to make the jump. Boom, I am through. Now, I guarantee you that on the checklist of ways that the developers envisaged this puzzle would be solved, the way I solved it would not be on that list. And the fact that I could solve this puzzle in this way is the perfect example of the Emergent gameplay systems philosophy that Arcane manages to so perfectly deliver throughout the experience. Any new space that you step into has 2 or 3 or 4 ways to progress through it, and those choices are informed by 3 things. Player approach, be that stealth or frontal assault, player powers, and also level design. On the approach front, Prey essentially asks the player to decide whether they want to be someone that avoids confrontation or embraces it. There's a highly functional stealth game in Prey, built on a foundation of stealth-focused talents, enemy icons that demonstrate how likely they are to spot you, weapons and items that will distract enemies, and even a talent tree allowing you to mimic items the same way that the alien mimics do. Prey gives you 5 or 6 ways to accomplish the stealth goal. It's just genius how they've managed to pull this off, even if the stealth game is significantly more frustrating in the latter third of the game due to the sheer number of enemies that you're trying to avoid. On the full frontal assault side of things, that works too. I mostly played this way throughout my playthrough, and while I found weapons to be fairly underpowered in the latter part of the game, my ability to spec into plenty of survivability stats got me over the line. In retrospect, I really regret the decision to play the game this way, as with the beauty of hindsight, I can now see how interesting, intelligent, and fun a more stealth-style approach would have been. This isn't to say that the combat is bad, it's just that it doesn't offer anything new or interesting over the thousands of other games that let you shoot things. My strong advice to anyone playing the game is to explore ways to avoid using your gun as much as possible, because this is where Prey provides something that few other games can. The best example of this is the player power system that eventually opens up. In short, you can put talents into alien abilities, allowing you to use their psionic powers for yourself. Mimic items like mimics, fire off telekinetic blasts, move things with your mind. All of these abilities are really powerful, way more powerful than your conventional weapons. But be warned, because the more points you put into these abilities, the more alien you become, and eventually security systems like turrets will eventually register you as an alien and will start firing on you when they see you. These powers manifestly impact the game experience, giving you access to a whole toolset that changes the way you play the game, something that many games try to achieve, but most fall well short of. But the secret sauce that holds all of this emergent gameplay together is once again the level design. See, me being able to lift up heavy objects isn't in itself interesting, but Prey's levels have been designed in such a way that I have so many options available to progress through them, and all of these options are informed by my player abilities or my desire to be stealthy or attack everything I see or whatever. Prey's levels reach into the core gameplay systems and deliver challenging, rewarding puzzles that leverage those systems, and it does it in almost every single room you step into. The result, and this point is so critical here, is that if you like games like this, these immersive sims, then the replayability available here in Prey is mind-boggling. Games like Fallout 4 and Mass Effect Andromeda claim to deliver a role-playing experience, but role-playing isn't just having a stat screen and a few lazy dialogue options. Role-playing is just that, playing a role, and where Fallout and Mass Effect rob you of so much agency and shuttle you down narrow, preconceived paths or dialogue options, Prey allows you to play the role you want to play. You feel so empowered to occupy that role that you chose because the toolset you're given is functional, and the world that's been built is so finely crafted that allows for true player expression in a way that so few games manage to achieve. There's going to be two types of Prey reviews. Reviews like mine, which come out in the first week of release, and they provide a singular view of what the game experience is like. But there are going to be other reviews that come out in the months to come from people who have played every single playstyle and have experimented with this game and pushed its gameplay systems to the limits. It's those reviews that will arrive in a few months' time that will truly tell the tale for how good a job Arcane have done here. Hyrule in The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild is held up now as the finest example of open world design in any video game, because the player freedom afforded to you and the different ways that you can solve the game's puzzles is the best example of highly functional emergent gameplay ever seen in an open world game to date. Well, Prey from Arcane Studios is the best example of emergent gameplay and design in a closed world game you have ever seen. Much like Zelda, it's not going to be for everyone, but for those that enjoy that style of play, you will simply not find anything better anywhere. System Shock 2 finally has the sequel we've been waiting for, and it's set a very, very high bar for future games to follow. As I wrap up this review, I'll admit that there's a great deal of tension in me about how I feel about Prey. On a technical level, Prey is phenomenal. It looks and plays beautifully, including on PC by the way, for anyone worried about the PC port. From a design perspective, Prey is extremely sound. It takes the principles of emergent gameplay set down by System Shock and Deus Ex and it perfects them, delivering them in an intuitive, consistent and compelling way in almost every new room you step into. The Talos is beautifully constructed, and at a micro and macro level, the level design is just the best in the business. But behind all of this praise is this niggling feeling that for all the good work Prey does and how technically sound it is, it didn't push enough barriers to truly leave a lasting impression on me. The Art Deco stylings are simply too familiar after BioShock used them over 3 games. The mimic enemies are now some of my favorite enemies in all of video games, but they feel drastically underutilized, and other enemy types are a mix of disappointing and frustrating. The carefully constructed tension and emergent gameplay of the first 2/3 of the game is greatly undermined by the endless spam of high HP enemies toward the end of the game. And the story, while interesting enough to keep you going, it does lack the satisfying twists and turns that create those really memorable moments, and the ending is rather abrupt and anticlimactic. Though I will say that there are a number of different ending options, and it's possible that I just haven't found the real big best one yet. For me, as I look back on my time with Prey, the most powerful memories I have aren't boss battles or big story moments. They're the moments where I get to explore the Talos from the outside and just remark its scale, or look into space from the captain's bridge and enjoy the view, or sail out to a scuttled shuttle out in the far reaches of space and explore its secrets, or just sit alone in an empty room carefully figuring out which of the 2 or 3 ways to progress to the next room will be the best one for me. It's the more quiet, exploration-focused memories that I have, where it's just me and the Talos. Those are the moments that really stick with me, and while I have no doubt that Prey will be studied in game design schools for how it perfects a gameplay design philosophy, I feel that Prey won't be remembered as breakthrough or innovative. Prey almost feels like that girl at school that's really pretty and really smart and does everything by the book and was the valedictorian and the prom queen and she's nice to everyone and she means it because she's actually a really nice person. But she's so perfect that you kind of find it hard to connect with her. And by maintaining that perfection, she's pushed away some of the gritty risk-taking that makes us all human. I feel that way about Prey. I feel like Prey needed to get drunk out on the town one night. Like it needed to say something really rude in class, rude enough to get it suspended. I feel like Prey needed to take the shackles off itself a bit and worry less about perfection and more about innovation. That for me would have pushed this already brilliant game into the next level category designed for those truly unforgettable classics. Prey owes much more to the past than it tries to invent a new future, but the homage that it pays is exceptional. Arcane Studios have done it again. And with now 3 major AAA games under their belt, I look forward to seeing how they'll evolve their formula in future to push the envelope further. For now though, anyone on the fence about Prey, don't be. Just jump in. If you like good, well-made, smart video games, then there's every chance that Prey is for you. Even if you don't love it, you'll surely at least respect it for the many, many things it manages to get right.